resolution demanding that Washington take action on climate change. But the reality is that while New Hampshire has been a model of innovation, Washington has failed to act. And that's why America isn't leading when it comes to taking on the threat of climate change. Washington's failure is the failure of a president who spent most of his time in office denying the very existence of global warming, suggesting that it might be a hoax. It's also a failure of our politics that predates George W. Bush, because we've heard promises about energy independence from every single U.S. president since Richard Nixon, Republicans and Democrats, and yet nothing has changed. The truth is, our energy problem has become an energy crisis, because no matter how well-intentioned the promise, no matter how bold the proposal, they all fall victim to the same Washington politics that has become more divided and more dishonest, more timid and more calculating, more beholden to the special interests that have the biggest stake in the status quo. There's some in this race who actually make the argument that the more time you spend immersed in the politics of Washington, the more likely you are to change it. I always find this a little amusing. I know that change makes for good campaign rhetoric, but when these same people had the chance to make change happen, they didn't lead. When they had the chance to stand up and require automakers to raise their fuel efficiency standards, they refused. When they had multiple chances to reduce our dependence on foreign oil by investing in renewable fuels that we can literally grow right here in the United States, they said no. Now, I know that some of the policies that are needed to deal with our energy crisis and the climate crisis are difficult politically. They aren't easy. But being president of the United States isn't about doing what's easy. It's about doing what's right. Leadership isn't about telling people what they want to hear. It's about telling the American people what they need to hear. When I arrived in the United States Senate, I wanted to do whatever I could to make real progress towards energy independence. I reached across the aisle to pass a law that will give more Americans the chance to fill up their cars with clean biofuels. I passed a law that will fuel the research needed to develop a car that can get 500 miles per gallon. I even voted for an energy bill that was far from perfect because I was able to ensure that it contained some real investment in renewable sources of energy. And I fought to eliminate the tax giveaways to oil companies that were slipped into that bill. Oil companies that have spent $500 million lobbying Congress in the last 10 years while their profits have risen to record levels. And I did something else. I knew that America hadn't raised fuel efficiency standards in our cars for over 20 years. Even though Japanese car companies that make more fuel efficient cars are running circles around our own car companies. Even though we send hundreds of millions of dollars a day to some of the world's most dangerous regimes because of our reliance on oil. So I decided to try something new. I reached across the aisle to come up with a plan to raise our fuel standards that won support from lawmakers who had never supported raising fuel emission standards before. I didn't just give a speech about it in front of some environmental group in California. I went to Detroit, and I gave it in front of the automakers. And I have to admit, the room was really quiet. But I had to tell them that there will be no more excuses when I'm president. We will help them retool their factories, but they will have to make cars that use less oil. And I said what I did because I believe America has had enough of politicians just pandering and telling folks what they want to hear. We have to tell the people the truth. And the truth is that you can't afford to let the same old politics stand in the way of our future anymore. We can't afford the same kind of caution when the future of our security is at stake. We know that the money that America spends on foreign oil is funding both sides of the war on terrorism. That it pays for everything from the madrasas that plant the seeds of terror in young minds to the Sunni insurgents that attack our troops in Iraq. We can't be afraid to stand up to the oil and auto industry when the future of our economy is at stake. The question is not if a renewable energy economy will thrive in the future, it's where. And if we want that place to be the United States of America, we can't afford to wait any longer. Most of all, we can't afford more of the same timid politics when it comes to the future of our planet. Here in New Hampshire, the ski industry is facing shorter seasons and losing jobs. We're already breaking records with the intensity of our storms, the number of forest fires, the periods of drought. The polar ice caps are now melting faster than science had ever predicted. And if we do nothing, sea levels will rise high enough to swallow large portions of every coastal city and town. I reject that future. It's not the future we want for our children. I know the American people have been promised energy independence before, but I would not be running for president if I did not believe this time could be different. Not because I have some perfect solution that every other expert and every other candidate has somehow missed, but because I believe the American people are ready for a president who can unite us around a common purpose again. I believe that we're ready to lead again. From the moment I take office as president, I will call together scientists and entrepreneurs, heads of industry and heads of labor, Democrats, Republicans, and Americans from all walks of life to help develop and deploy the next generation of energy that will allow us to build the next generation's economy, create millions of new jobs and entire industries right here in the United States. The first step in doing this is to phase out a carbon-based economy that's causing our climate change. As president, I will set a hard cap on all carbon emissions at a level that scientists say is necessary to curb global warming, 80% by 2050. In addition, all polluters will have to pay based on the amount of pollution they release into the sky. The market will set the price, but unlike the other tax and cap and trade proposals that have been offered up in this race so far, no business will be allowed to emit any greenhouse gases for free. Businesses don't own the sky, the public does. And if we want them to stop polluting it, we have to put a price on all pollution. Once we make dirty energy expensive, the second step of my plan is to invest $150 billion, much of that generated from the auction that I just mentioned, from the cap and trade system I just mentioned, $150 billion over the next decade in clean, affordable energy. That starts with the next generation of biofuels. In just 2 years, the renewable fuel standard I helped pass has sparked an historic expansion in the production of biofuels like ethanol. But the truth is, corn ethanol is neither the perfect nor the permanent answer to our energy challenge. That's why we must invest in the next generation of advanced biofuels like cellulosic ethanol that can be made from things like wood chips. The struggling paper mills in New Hampshire would be back in business if they could use wood to produce biofuels. And that's something that we should invest in. Many of these clean energy technologies, including the solar panels being used over Stonyfield farms, are being developed in research labs and facilities all across America at this very moment. The problem is, they might never get further than that. U.S. venture capital does a great job investing in research and development, but we don't do enough to take risk out of bringing the new discoveries into the wider marketplace. This will change.